Hey, yo, good evening and welcome to Dash Sports TV, where we will talk all things Cal football. It's been a historic week in sports, and things are being shaken up at Cal and beyond. Cal players are transferring. There are protests across this professional sports world. I'm Jasper Sundeen, a sports reporter at the Daily Californian.
I'm Shailin Singh, also a sports reporter at the Daily Cal.
And we are Bear Dash. So, biggest news of the week for you Cal sports fans. Luc Bequette's transferred to Boston College. He's a D lineman. He's the rock in Cal's D line. Shailin, take it away.
Yeah, so Beckett transferring to Boston College is a huge loss. We kind of expected some transfers to happen from the Pac-12 to schools that were playing, but we hadn't heard anything from Cal, not even rumors really. So it seemed like we were in the clear, but Beckett announced via his Twitter that he's going to Boston College. He was a 3-year starter in his 6th year of eligibility for Cal. So he was a veteran player, one of the leaders of the defense, and he was able to go to BC as a grad transfer. So he's eligible to play this fall. And he's probably going to have a big role with that team. But Cal is losing some major production: 52 tackles and 4 tackles for loss last season. He could play inside at nose guard or bump out to D end in Cal's 3-4 scheme. Didn't generate a ton of sacks, but he was there to shrink the pocket and clog up running lanes. So it's a major loss for Cal, and they're going to have to find a way to rebound and replace him. So, Jasper, who would you say off the bat is the most likely candidate to replace Beckett on the line?
Yeah, well, like you said, Beckett's a machine. He's a presence this team is going to miss. For me, at this point, season, we don't know if it's around the corner or not, but the move that makes the most sense is it's go platoon. Cal's a bit thin on the D line. I think they have 4 other D linemen on the roster, but you got to get multiple guys in there. You got to rotate it out. There are a lot of names that can be thrown in there. You have a lot of players from other positions. Jaden Roberts is a big name that they just recruited. He's an athlete, athletic kid from Connecticut. He could have a role this season, but platooning makes the most sense here. You're going to have more time to acclimate players to that position, whether they're new freshmen, whether they're players from different position groups. You just got to bring it in. You got to mix around. D line is demanding, and having one player at risk there is just I don't see the need for that.
Is there
Here,
someone that you see as a starter, or do you think they're gonna? So Cal and Justin Wilcox like to do a thing where they don't like naming starters in any capacity until they absolutely have to, and a lot of the times they'll kind of just throw out random names during practice because it's kind of a philosophy for Cal not to give the opponent any information, like any more information than they have to. So there were times where they would name like random receivers as starters during practice, and then during a game it would be someone different. So do you think it's the type of thing where it's just going to be a random starter and then someone will start to play a lot in place of Beckett, or do you think it's the type of platoon where they're going to just switch players out all the time?
if it were me, and I'm not a Cal football coach, so don't go knocking on my door, but I throw it out, be random, be wild. This is going to be a season unlike any other. We don't know when it's going to happen, but we can tell you that now. Platoon, like I said, platoon, platoon, platoon. Keep people on their toes. I mean, keep your own players on their toes. You want maximum effort out of these guys and make them earn that position. I think another aspect of this is whenever this season starts, whether that be in the spring, whether that be a year from now, COVID-19 is probably still going to be on a lot of people's minds. And it makes more sense from a health perspective to platoon. You don't want a starter who can get sick, who can get injured. You want multiple people who can step into that role anywhere on the defensive line, right? You're platooning at this position. Say Ziande Johnson gets injured, Brett Johnson gets injured. Throw someone else into the mix. If you're platooning, you have a lot of guys ready, and I'd rather have more guys ready than not enough.
I think so. You mentioned guys like Jaden Roberts, and there's another incoming freshman, Ricky Coria. He's massive, 6'4", 330. He led his high school, Central High School in California, to a 15-0 record and had 14 tackles for loss as a senior, and they ended ranked nationally on Max Prep. He's a baller. I think him and Roberts are going to battle it out, but I don't think either of them are going to be getting
Ooh,
a bulk of the playing time. I think it's going to be Aaron
veteran. Okay.
Maldonado. Yeah, I think it's going to be Aaron Maldonado. He was a rising junior who he played 9 games off the bench last season, but kind of for unexplained reasons did not even report to the team for the first 4 weeks. So that's still a situation that they didn't make public. And he was unable to play last season's spring ball, though, due to an upper body injury. So we didn't really get to see what Maldonado can actually offer when he has a full offseason to prep. And this off season is obviously can't be really considered a regular off season, but he's fully healthy, and presumably I think is the best candidate to take the place of Bequette as a defensive end. But he's traditionally a nose guard, which is the thing that is kind of up in the air. And Brett Johnson was unbelievable as a nose guard, and I think he's interchangeable. They could play Maldonado at end and Johnson at nose guard, or switch it around. But I think you'll see Maldonado get the bulk of the playing time, and those two freshmen get a bit of playing time here and there. But you're right, the depth is incredibly thin, and that's something fans should be a bit worried about.
Absolutely. Maldonado is a great player. It'll be exciting to see what he does. Cal's coaches, though, have shown time and again to be showing themselves to be some real defensive gurus. I would not count out some creative, sneaky platooning, some moving around, some shifting of the pieces. It can get funky, and now they got time because the offseason's been extended.
No, they like doing that too. Another potential option would be to slide Tevin Paul, who's traditionally an outside linebacker in Cal's 3-4 scheme. He started the past 2 seasons. He could slide back onto the line as a D end. So then the question becomes who's going to replace him at outside linebacker, because he's also more of a pass rushing guy, and they would need someone to take his place in coverage at outside linebacker. So I think it will start off as a platoon, but I think as the season goes on, you're going to see Maldonado sort of take that place. But I say that, and also Brett Johnson, it was the complete opposite last season. He started off playing sparingly as Cal's nose guard and came off the bench at the start, and then by the end of the season, he was one of Cal's best defensive players. So you honestly just never know.
You never know with this team. I think another real critical question, especially with this defensive line, would have been one of Cal's. How do these changes affect Cal's season outlook? How does this affect the win totals when the season does happen? What will this do?
I don't think you can really consider Luc Bequette as a guy that'll swing the win total of Cal's season. He was a baller. Don't get me wrong. He was an absolute baller. But yeah, I think I've talked a lot about Brett Johnson. I think he's ready to take that leap. He wreaked havoc as a true freshman. He has a wrestling background. He's absolutely massive, and he's insane with his hands. He could absolutely clog up holes, and he showed some ability to get to the quarterback, but he was primarily there to shut down the run game. And I think even as a sophomore, he has the potential to fill the gap that Beckett's going to leave. He was named to numerous all Pac-12 preseason teams, and I think that he can provide enough production that you won't see the loss of Bequette completely shutting down Cal in a game that they would have won otherwise.
Look, the kid's got skills. There's no doubt. He's going to be a big part of this team next season. He's going to be a big part of this team for years to come. For me, though, my entire focus is on the Oregon game. We talked about it last week. You said it's the marquee game on Cal's schedule. It's the most important game for next season. When season comes. In their last game in Oregon, Cal was without Chase Garbers. It hurt them, but they only lost by 10 points. And it was because their defense produced. Their defense came up clutch. But that defense also gave up 190 rushing yards to a trio of Oregon running backs who will all be back. Verdell, Habibi Lakio, Travis Dye, those guys will all be in the backfield for Oregon, and they tore up Cal last time. I mean, they rolled through the Bears.
They did. But I think that can partially be – you can't just – say we do end up losing that Oregon, right, and Oregon goes off for 200 rushing yards. I think that's also – partly we're losing Evan Weaver, who was probably the best run-stopping linebacker in college football last season. He's one of them. I mean, you can't even argue with that. That's just look at the stats. But
Evan Weaver was, I'm not going to say a non-presence because Evan Weaver is never a non-presence. The man is always there. The man always steps up. But Evan Weaver did not have the biggest game of his career. It was Coin Dang and Luc Bequette who were making a lot of tackles, and now Bequette is gone. I think this could really change the complexion of that game. And for that reason, it just changes Cal's chances at a Pac-12 North title ever so slightly.
It does, yeah. It starts in the trenches. It always does. But Oregon's losing, I think, 4 of their starting offensive linemen, so they're
That's
also
true.
going to have stuff switching around there. I just don't think that Beckett being gone changes the season outlook as a whole. He's a huge void that they need to fill, but I think they can do it. And it starts with Brett Johnson, and
Absolutely.
some of the younger guys will fill in there. I mean, Aaron Maldonado, we consider him a veteran, but he hasn't really played. He's a rising junior.
He hasn't had a chance to show up yet.
Yeah, exactly. So speaking of Beckett transferring, this is something we touched on a little last episode, but do you think there are any other Cal players that would benefit from transferring?
I think this is a complex question, and there are a lot of levels to it. But for me, no. Um, I know why. I can understand maybe why Beckett would transfer, but for me, no. Transferring doesn't make sense.
How about
For
no?
one,
Yeah. How about we start with that? Did it for Beckett make sense transferring? Because I mean, he was a Cal guy. He was loved here. Fans absolutely
through
adored
and
him.
through, through and
I would
through,
be walking
and
down. I was
bled blue and
walking down
gold.
Durant one time, going to Top Dog, and there were 3 people. Like Cal's not even like a football city. Like you don't see people in
Absolutely,
Berkeley like
Berkeley ain't a
you
football
know
town.
fanboying over football players. But there were 3 people who passed by Beckett and like either said good job on the game, like things of that nature. Like he was loved here, but
He was the
I think it
presence.
makes it made sense for him. You know, he's getting old. He's already 23. It is his 6th year of NCAA eligibility. And as a grad transfer going to BC, he has the chance to play, which that's not guaranteed here. And he's the type of guy that was probably going to go undrafted, but with BC, he has a chance to maybe improve his draft stock to a late round, like 7th round. And I wouldn't put that out of the question. So I fully respect his decision. But there's no certainty there either. The season could get canceled at
Absolutely.
any moment. So
Absolutely. Well, yeah, from both the medical and a draft perspective, you want to be as healthy as you can for that combine. And so a spring season can hurt those opportunities to be healthy. A productive fall season can move them up draft boards. But for me, like I said, no, this doesn't make sense. Why? Because the ACC season, like you said, is still uncertain. It could still get canceled. North Carolina State and Virginia Tech had a game postponed. It was going to be a season opener, and you're looking at week 1. You already have chaos. And I know the ACC and the SEC and the Big 12 have all come out and said they're going to do their best. They're going to have a season that projects like a veneer of certainty. But the fact is, if we've seen one thing in this pandemic, is that nothing is certain. I would not be.
these players are absolutely taking massive gambles. Like
Absolutely.
transferring in any capacity is risky, but transferring now, I mean, it's also just as much of a gamble to stay as it is to transfer.
That's
But
true.
with him going, does that open the door, do you think, for other players to follow suit on Cal's roster?
This is a tricky question. We talked about this last week. This team feels very close. A lot of the guys who might, a lot of the graduate transfers, they've been here for a while, but I could see some guys going. And again, it's a short term versus long term evaluation. It's the certainty that even if maybe the next season doesn't get played out, it will start. You'll have a chance to put up some numbers. You'll have a chance to get in there. You'll have a chance to play football, which you love as a player, and I got to respect that. I can see other 6-year seniors, Deontay Johnson, fellow 6-year senior on the defensive line. He can maybe move. Jake Kern is an offensive lineman who will graduate in December. If things are still uncertain, then he's a draft hopeful. He could maybe sneak into the 7th round if he has a productive season somewhere. So I think there certainly could be more players transferring.
My thing with that though is, then again, I also thought this about just in general, which is why Beckett's transfer caught me by surprise. But I feel like those type of players, if they were going to transfer, they would have done it already, because the season starts in a couple weeks, and if you're not coming for the start of the season, like I guess they're banking on next season or a spring season. But that Cal's in the same boat then. So like, what do you gain from that?
Yeah.
And speaking of transfers, I just want to bring this up for Cal fans that might not know this. Wide receiver Ricky Walker III announced that he was grad transferring to Oregon State. The reason we didn't mention that, he didn't have that big of a role with Cal. he only had 2 catches the entire season last year, despite having 2 starts, which, I mean, that's not production that you're going to miss in any way, shape, or form. He was an Oakland kid, though, homegrown player, but he's going to Oregon State. And funny enough, both of his catches last season were against Oregon State. So we'll miss him, but I think the wide receiver room is in good shape. We'll be just fine.
Absolutely. But yeah, I think we will see another transfer or two. I would not be surprised, but it does depend on a lot of things. It depends on what the eligibility rules are like. Like as you said, the season's right around the corner, right? Transferring now can mess with your eligibility. I mean, things are so uncertain everywhere that it makes more sense to stay in place. But the Pac-12 has been very committed to being cautious, and the SEC and ACC haven't. And who knows, they could pay for it. There's been tons of outbreaks within those programs. There's been outbreaks within those schools. 8 of the 10 schools in the U.S. with the most coronavirus cases are set to start their football seasons in the next couple of weeks, which is mind blowing to me. Which is absolutely ridiculous.
Oh yeah, and no, the thing is, they're doing it with fans too. Like UGA, their stadium can hold, I think 90 something thousand fans, and they're still allowing, I think, like 25,000 is what I saw a couple days ago, which is absurd because their cases are also spiking too, which is why I'm saying transferring doesn't make any sense. It's just too, why go through the whole process of re-recruiting just to go to a team where, I mean, you talk about a Cal player going to an SEC school, they're probably not going to get as much playing time as they would here. Plus, their season's probably also going to get canceled.
Yeah.
I don't see, at least all 3 of those conferences, the major conferences that are playing, I don't see all 3 of them finishing. I really don't.
I agree with you, but I do think, as much as I agree with you with the illogical aspect of transferring, I think it doesn't make sense. I do think there's also the short-term versus long-term. I would guarantee that at least one more Pac-12 player will transfer. I would not be surprised if a Cal player transfers, just because you're here to play football. Your NFL career, the window in which you can play football is a short one, and you got to maximize that. And for a lot of
you're only talking about certain players, because for some people, you're here to play football, but you're also here to get a University of California, Berkeley education.
Oh, that's true. Jeez.
Yeah. Forgot about that, right?
No. That you make a really good point. I mean, I think I didn't even think about it. A strong part of Cal's recruiting recently has been that sort of pitch that Berkeley is more than just football, that it's preparing you for things beyond football.
Yeah, and I think that
could keep players
important.
Here.
That's more important now than ever. Like we're going to talk about recruiting next episode or the episode after.
We'll get to it eventually.
But yeah, no, there's players. Cal has a fantastic 2021 recruiting class, and we had the chance to talk to some coaches about that recruiting class and that process. And there are players who, before like asking specifics about the football program,
right,
they would go, "Can I speak to a professor about this, this, and this?" And that's just not something you would really see. Like, I wouldn't expect that out of a Cal player to want to transfer to Florida or Tennessee or something like that.
That's true. Wilcox's recruiting is really focused on bringing in players, not for just their football careers, but their careers beyond football. And that's something that Berkeley has. I mean, it's a great academic institution. It's a great place to network. And you do have players that prioritize that. And I think you're right. That could actually play a role in keeping them here. But I would not be surprised if other Pac-12 players make the decision to take their talents elsewhere.
I agree.
It is. It's always weighing the uncertainty. I mean, we don't know what this will look like in 12 months. We don't know what it'll look like in 6 months. And it depends on what the Pac-12 does and what their next steps are.
Absolutely.
Moving on a bit wider scale, this has been an eventful week in the world of sports, to say the least. We've seen postponements and protests across the sporting world. And I think every major American professional sporting league, in wake of the protests in Kenosha, Wisconsin, and the shooting of another unarmed black man, players are making their voices heard across the sports world. How does this? I know this will reach the world of college football. How will it reach the world of college football? How will things change? What are the effects?
So I don't know if the events that happened last week or earlier this week are going to change things any more than like the entire Black Lives Matter movement already has. I think college football players were gonna protest, and they will, but I think now it's becoming a bigger threat to the NCAA and the conferences, because you've seen teams like Mississippi, Ole Miss, Mississippi State, both boycotted practices this week. And you don't know what these players are thinking in terms of if it's in the back of their mind to potentially boycott games. Like, imagine University of Alabama football players, like, with fans in the stadium, like, getting ready to kick off and then just walking off the field. Like, that would be absolutely ridiculous.
Be astounding.
And like that's going to be like one of the first times there's fans, and in an area, like, if you look at the demographic of a lot of these schools that are playing football, a lot of them, just are conservative. A lot of them are Trump supporters. So that would really, really open their eyes and be like, okay, I'm not getting my fix of SEC football now. Like, something's going on. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know if that's gonna. Do you see there being a chance of players boycotting a game? Because we've seen it in practice already, especially in the past day or two.
Yeah. I think it depends on a lot of things. It depends on a lot of factors. It depends on the sort of what this looks like when the season starts. But I think players will absolutely speak up. We've seen it. We've seen it in professional sports leagues. We've seen it in college football. The We Are United movement in the Pac-12, the We Want to Play movement. We've seen people stretch across conferences, across sports, to make statements, to create a movement. That they're empowered. The players know that they're the reason the sport exists, and they know they have a voice. I absolutely think maybe not boycott at first, but I do think there will be statements. The reason I actually believe there could be a boycott is if there are larger coronavirus outbreaks. We've seen a lot of synergism in college football between players protesting and making statements for their personal health, and mixing that in with desires for change on a social level, for creating change within the Black Lives Matter movement, for using that movement to create change at their institutions. And I think a synergy of those two issues could create things we don't expect. They could create boycotts. I mean, if you're a player and you're putting your life at risk by playing during a pandemic, and you also have a university that's not respecting the Black Lives Matter movement, those are just more reasons to get involved. Those are more reasons to put your voice on the line and to make a difference.
That's absolutely fair. But I feel like the conference most likely to do that is the Pac-12. Like, we saw it with the We Are United movement.
Yeah.
And those players have just proven to be a bit more progressive, at least socially, than some of the players in the other conferences. So if we're talking about football this fall, like, with these social injustice issues at the forefront of society right now, I feel like the Pac-12, had we been playing football this fall, you would see like boycotts and things of games. But I just don't know if players, and this is not a knock against players in other conferences, it just seems like they're like slightly less organized. Like, the Pac-12 We Are United movement has been very well thought out. Like, you can even see it on their social media posts. Like, they're all working as one. It's like a well-oiled machine. Like, they're all kind of like bouncing off of each other with their posts. They all have like similar like wording. They're on the same page. I just don't know if other conferences are organized like that, but you could see it with individual teams too. So
yeah, like you said, teams are boycotting.
Yeah, go
ahead. And plenty of these guys are in contact with each other. I know the We Are United movement was working with players from other schools during the pandemic to put together statements that were NCAA wide, that got everyone involved. And I wouldn't be surprised to see that again, especially if, like I said, you have a synergy of issues. If people are really dissatisfied, they'll go out and seek change. And a lot of these guys at ACC schools, a lot of these young men at SEC schools, at Big 12 schools, they're smart. They're young. They're activists. They've made their voices heard in the past. They were really proactive on stepping up and making sure their schools were both saying and trying to do the right thing. And if their schools don't, if these institutions and these conferences don't, I would not be surprised to see them back out there on the front lines.
Yeah, and we've seen like it does not just apply to professional sports. Like we've seen that athletes can make an actual difference. A lot of people see these protests. A lot of like the naysayers see these protests and they're like, okay, well, why don't you do something to like actually go and change it? But these NBA boycotts literally caused all NBA arenas to be changed into voting precincts for the election. Like that is physical change that's like come about because of these boycotts. And I think that college athletes hold just as much power to do certain things like that.
Absolutely.
So I would not put it past these teams and these conferences to protest more and protest further and create these actual changes.
Absolutely.
But that you saw the NFL. So this was granted like a year ago when these issues were still at the forefront of society, but the NFL clearly had a stance on them that was not as caring as they probably are now. And we saw that they were doing things like not allowing teams to come out onto the field and kneel during the anthem. So do you think that the NCAA or individual conferences will suppress any type of protest or inflict punishments for them?
I have no doubt that there will be conversations behind the scenes. There will be things we don't see. There will be rules put in place. I think the nature of the movement, its pressing nature more specifically, has changed the landscape. We saw that with the NFL. Like you said, times have changed. The NFL has been forced to change. And I would love it if a lot of conferences and institutions were put in the same position where they have to make their actions match their words and they can't oppress players' voices. But I do think that will happen, whether that on individual instances or at a larger level. I think it comes down to what your star players do, what your big time players, what your Trevor Lawrences do, what these guys who are really big names, not just within their schools, but on a national level, words they say.
Yeah, and also you can't forget about the coaches either, because I forget if it was Ole Miss or Mississippi State, but I saw a tweet where one of the players or some media outlet was like, this team boycotted practice today. And one of the players commented on that and said, no, we didn't boycott practice. Our coaches gave us permission to protest during our practice time, and the coaches protested with us. So now that you're seeing the coaches get involved, like conferences will have to listen. And if they're just inflicting all these guidelines on like how you can and can't protest, I don't think that's going to fly. I don't think that's going to fly anymore.
That would absolutely be unacceptable. Any way you look at it. The conferences have an obligation to make their players' voices heard. Whether they do, of course, is entirely a mystery to us. But one hopes they would. No, I think it'll be a very interesting time and a very interesting season. I think players should absolutely step up. Like you said, it does create concrete change, but it also just starts a conversation. You said the demographics of NBA viewership, the people who watch the NBA, I think are very different than a lot of people who are watching college football in Alabama.
Oh, absolutely. You see like college football as a fan base. That's why there's so much, like a lot of people call college football fans the most passionate of any sport, because they are very specific demographics of people, especially like on a location by location basis, that will really rally around their teams. And if you see the players, we're just about out of time here, but if those fans are seeing these players protest, it may even sway some opinions on like, okay, maybe these players do have a point. At least we can hope.
Absolutely. And their voices deserve to be heard, and we have to listen to them. But sadly enough, that's all 30 minutes for us, folks. That's all the time we've got this week. So please, if you have any questions, if there's anything we missed, if there's any questions that weren't answered, feel free to hit up our Twitters. They're right here. You can also find us at Dashsports TV on Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, and Instagram, and find more content on our website, dashsportstv.tv, or at thedailycal.org, where Shailin and I both write columns, articles, anything you need on Cal sports, Cal football, and the wider world of sports. So please stay safe, And in the words of our friend Justice, stay hydrated. Until next week, folks.